This week it's all about patterns, human patterns in nature, just emerging patterns. And this came about in an amazing conversation with Roslyn Snyder. Now in this conversation we go deep into her realm theory. This is a big conversation, and if you're into patterns and see systems and into system thinking, then you're going to really enjoy this. Roslyn breaks down her realm theory into the 3 realms and then really explains those, and there's great opportunity for me to ask lots of questions which hopefully helps you to understand it in a greater depth. And we talk about its application. We also talk about the paintings, just not just about how this is a mathematical pattern, but she's also painted it and sang it and danced it. It's I'm a bit lost for words with this conversation because there's so much to it, and it's really powerful. I've listened to it back again since, and there's so much to bed in. So if you find yourself having to stop and pause and reflect for a while, don't worry about that. There's a lot in here. If you really do resonate with this, I'd really love to hear from you. Please reach out, because I think right now the world needs a lot more people who can see systems, see patterns, and really explore those, so we can start to see our future trajectory. Anyway, Roslyn's super fun to talk to. She's got a great sense of humour as well as an amazing depth of knowledge. So enjoy Roslyn. Hello and welcome back to WA Real. I'm your host, Bryn Edwards. Today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Roslyn Snyder. Roslyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bryn. Thank you for asking me.
You're very welcome. So it was only yesterday we were on the phone talking and the topic of patterns came up.
Yes.
And I said something that rather interested you, because I was talking about the changes that I'd noticed that people go through between the rough sort of age of sort of 37 to 42.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that through the variety of people that I've spoken to in the podcast, I've listened to the stories and I started to see patterns, and that's one of those particular patterns that I've experienced and was actually a catalyst for me to start this, as I tried to understand the world through other people's stories rather than book learning.
Yeah.
Which I was very good at before, reading all this stuff and then putting maps on the world and then realizing that the maps don't fit. And then in the middle of that, we started talking about patterns, and that's where it kind of got exciting, and that's where we agreed to have this conversation.
Yes.
So at the top level, right summary intro level, tell me about your pattern.
The pattern that I see?
Yes.
Okay, so I have actually seen this pattern since I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Right.
And I just assumed everyone saw it.
Yes.
And so...
That's interesting.
Yeah, because I just assumed everyone saw it.
Yes.
And so when I first started school, and the pattern helped me understand maths really well. And I started doing maths 2 to 3 years ahead of everyone else in the class. And it was really confusing to me that why couldn't other people see this? And it was also, the pattern is in human relationships, and it's everywhere. And sometimes the teacher would respond in certain ways and I'm like, that's really weird. They're not seeing what I'm seeing. And they weren't seeing beyond what was happening here. And so that has actually guided my entire life, because I wanted to understand what I saw.
Yes.
And
right. You wanted to make sense
of
how
totally.
You made sense.
Yeah, because this was like as fundamental as this table in front of us now. I could see this. And so all through my schooling, that's what I was trying to find out, if any other one. Well, at first I just assumed everyone knew it.
Yes.
And then afterwards I was like, a lot of people don't see this. So I started to explore that. But along the way, because I've had quite an interesting upbringing, I've actually lived with probably close to 100 people growing up.
Right.
So when you live with people in a household is very different from just meeting people. And so this pattern was playing out everywhere. And so it ended up, I left school and then went back and studied pure science because I was basically told that science has all the answers.
Right.
So I went and studied physics, chemistry, mathematics, and it was like, yeah, they're all interested in patterns, but they're very small patterns.
Right.
Right?
Is that what you were saying earlier on with the teacher? You see it here, but why don't you go?
Why don't you see that connected into that, like this?
Yeah, the interconnectivity.
Yeah, the total interconnectivity. And, you know, like in physics and chemistry, it's all these theorems, you know, the force of the glass here, but it's very, very isolated and little. So I worked out that science wasn't going to help me understand that. And so I decided to study psychology.
Right.
Because I grew up in an environment where there was a lot of, I suppose, violence, alcohol, drugs, and a whole heap of behaviours that weren't, I don't know, healthy.
Productive health.
Not healthy at all.
Yeah.
And then I ended up working in a medical laboratory.
Right.
And in this laboratory, we had lots and lots of medical specialists in the centre. And I started to recognise that there was a pattern in their dynamics, how they interacted with people, which just intrigued me. And it was the same pattern that I grew up with, but what they were doing was different.
Right.
So for instance, in my childhood, people would drink way too much. These ones would buy lots of stuff.
Right. Buy too
But
much.
yeah, and it was still trying to feel something, it felt like. And so that's when I decided I'd go and study psychology.
Right.
Along the way, I had got married and had a couple of children, and so when I started studying psychology, it was amazing. I was learning all this stuff, and I was still just like, this isn't what I've been able to see. It's little parts of it, but really tiny parts of it.
Yes.
It's like a glass in your liquor cabinet. They were teaching me about this glass, not that there's 30 different glasses and they're all used for different things.
Yes.
And so that sort of frustrated me a little bit. But, you know, I graduated, did really well. And then it was 6 months after I graduated, I had a dream. And this dream was of this very concrete picture, which is known as the map. And what I've discovered in this simple picture that I can explain to someone in 2 to 3 minutes is lots and lots of psychological theories.
Right.
So another psychologist did her doctoral thesis on the theories that are in this simple picture that I drew. And it's a very concrete picture. It's about the emotional landscape that we have. And what I've discovered is that it applies to everyone. And it has places in it like the swamp of feelings, the rocky paths, the anger and guilt mudflats, the depths of despair, the avoidance marshes, the desolate desert. And so this psychologist went along and did her doctoral thesis on it, and she found 32 psychological theories within this little picture.
That already existed, or?
Yeah. You know, all the different theories and all of that. And meanwhile, I'd started using this in my psychology practice, and I've had quite astounding results with people because I didn't diagnose them.
You've been practicing for 20 odd years, haven't you?
Yeah, 20 years. And so in my first session with someone, I would show them this little picture and I'd just say, and I explain it and say, whereabouts are you? And they'd go, oh, I'm stuck, I'm here. I said, okay, so you're in the anger and guilt mudflats. The map shows you, because it's a map, we have to go through the swamp of feelings, get to the forest of hope. That's our treatment plan. And it doesn't matter what the diagnosis is. So the patterns that I was seeing growing up So for instance, that thing where I said the emptiness, and people trying to fill that emptiness is in avoidance marshes.
In the what?
Avoidance marshes.
The avoidance marsh.
So you avoid the emotions.
Hmm.
So when we avoid emotions, we actually shut down the feelings.
Yes.
And we go into our headspace.
Yes.
And we love book learning.
We love book learning.
Book learning.
Yeah.
And we want to analyse everything.
Yeah.
And you would have heard of the term analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
Right? But
that's a good.
Yeah. So, but then people are left with this emptiness where their heart and emotions need to be. So then they fill it with something. So some people fill it with drugs, some fill it with working 80 hours a week, some fill it with power and prestige, but they're still feeling empty. That never fills it until we actually get a heart connection with someone. And then there's other places that will also have addictions or that, but it's for a different reason.
Yes. And
so it's an underlying root cause of the behaviour rather than just the behaviour. And so I had this really successful private practice. I had at least a year's waiting list most of the time, over 50 doctors trying to refer to me, worked with some very, very extreme situations and crises and that. I've worked with it in prisons and all of that. But going back to the pattern, this pattern in this map is a small part of a bigger pattern.
Right.
Right? Because the pattern in this map gets you, if you go through the map and get to the Seymour Mountains, each time you do it, you get closer to the centre of your life. Right? So when the psychologist interviewed me for the doctoral thesis, one of the questions she asked me was, when you teach about the map, you tell everyone it's a mathematical model. What do you mean by that? And how would you do it? And I said, well, the map is actually like a graph. And she was like, a graph? And I said, yeah, but a 4-dimensional graph. And as I said it, I was like, that's not right. Even though that's in her thesis. I've said it's a 4-dimensional graph. And I went away and I started really reflecting on that. And what I realised, that it was multi-dimensional, not just 4-dimensional. And that it was part of this bigger pattern. And so then it was like, wow, what am I going to do with that? And so then I went back to university to do a PhD, to basically, I suppose, describe this pattern and then sort of put all the research into it. But once again, it became bigger than this. And a PhD is supposed to be a very... This, but deep down.
Yes.
This was deep down, but it was connected to everything this way as well, and above. And so I spent 3 years researching, reading. You talked about book learning before. And, you know, when I went to university, because it was so new to me, because I'd left school early, I didn't feel that educated, I worked out that I read over 1,000 books in my 3 years of undergrad. I would sit in the library, this was before we had the computer systems to search for abstracts and stuff, and I read every abstract in journals from like 1920s to now. Every abstract in the Journal of Personality and Individual Difference, the Journal of... And then I read the complete works of Freud and Jung. So, so I had this huge book learning, which has all gone into this pattern, which I have now published as realm theory.
Yes.
And so what I've done, it's actually in probably a field called quantum chaos, but it could also be called just complexity theory, some call it nonlinear dynamics. But basically, the universe could be divided into any number of little sections, right? Which then becomes too overwhelming, right? But a single frame of reference is too simplistic, right? So realm theory has divided it up into 3 realms.
Right.
And then within each of the realms is 3 worlds. And the 3 realms are different frames of reference, and the worlds are different states, I would describe it.
Okay. We'll dive into that more in a second.
Yeah.
Just before we do dive into that, what strikes me here is, and I don't know whether this is just what lights my fire as well at the same time, is that, you know, you're talking about reading 1,000 books, all the abstracts. What we're talking about here is almost like operating at a meta level.
Yes.
Aren't we?
Yep.
And do you think that, this is probably quite a personal question for me, do you think that some people are just wired up to think at a meta level, or do you think we all have the capacity for it?
I think some people are wired up to think at that level, but a lot more could be trained to think,
trained and
encouraged.
Because when you talked about, and I won't dive into this too long, because I know most people, and I want to get into the realm. When you talked about you saw something, but you were confused as to why the rest of the world
couldn't see it.
There have been frequent times in my life where I can just extrapolate things, and you can see where they're going to head.
Yeah.
But nobody else. You can try and explain that, and everyone sort of just glazes, or it's just a bit too much, or this, that, and the other end. And for many years, I thought, coming out of 11 years of being in a boys' boarding school, which was quite a closeted, English boys' boarding school, was quite a closeted environment, and I was just trying to make sense of the world as well at the same time, I just thought that it was me.
Yes.
Right? Why is it that I am drawn to seeing probably because I'm a bit slow, was my conclusion that I dropped into, and that everybody else had already got this, and they're already just operating. They didn't want to spend time talking about this stuff. They didn't But at the same time, everyone was falling into the same bloody traps all the time. Yeah. And it was like highly confusing. I was like, and then, you know, I did the Masters in Business Psych and went and worked in as a consultant, and then you start to see the same mistakes repeat, and you're just like, well, if we make this decision, this is what's going to happen in 18 months' time.
Yep.
It's obvious, you know, and I'm living it right now in my part-time job, and you're like, why just? And for me personally, it's only been in the last 2 years that I finally get to the point of going, no, I'm not putting tickets on myself, I just see things slightly differently. Yeah. If someone can do this, I see it like this.
Yeah. So one part of the training I do with people is identifying each person's own energy pattern, right? And this is like, we're all born with a particular energy pattern, and with realm theory. So there's 8 alternative core energy patterns, 8 keys, which is what you have to do to open it up. Key power, which is your internal power, but what I wanted to get to is the focus. And there's 8 levels, and so some people work at the micro level, so they only see micro sort of things, and so it goes micro, singular, plural, like group, systemic, universal, and then beyond. So there's these levels, and so I know that my energy pattern is at the universal level. I'm not at the beyond level, and I've met people that are at the beyond level, and so that's where my focus is. And people each have their own focus that they're born with, and when we all are keyed into that, everything, this is my dream, everything becomes in harmony, because
Yes.
we're living our nature, place and purpose. So everything we do...
It's not that we can all be all things.
No, not at all. The key is look in, find your energy pattern. Right?
So if you're one of these very micro people, then potentially a job in engineering and things like that is completely for you.
Yes. And I've just been working with someone who's a musician, and everyone wants him to be this universal musician, and he's just identified that he is at like a family level or a small group. So now he's looking at how can he have his little concerts with just 20 to 30 people.
Right.
Because that's what suits him.
Does he want to be in like a small quartet or something like that?
Yeah, he doesn't want, and people have been trying to put him on a big stage, and it's like, that's not me.
That's going to freak me out.
Well, it's not even free. It's just not. Because he says, I like that intimate connection with people. When you're performing in front of that many people, it's just like, huh?
Yeah.
You might as well be for him. But someone that's universal will love that. Right? So there's these,
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So should we get into the realms?
Yes, we can do that.
Is that the best way to approach this?
Yeah, probably the thing I would like to just, so to understand realm theory, we actually, it's a big paradigm shift.
Yes.
Because most of us want to see things from an independent framework.
Can you explain what that means?
So from outside, so we can see this glass and the water in it, right? And it's totally separate from us. It's totally independent from us.
Always like the scientific viewer.
Yeah. And, you know, in psychology, we've learnt to not be involved.
Yes.
Not get intimately involved with people. But we are. Sitting here, we're connected. We can't say there's no connection here. And so the three paradigm shifts to actually understand realm theory. And the first one is from an independent frame of reference, where we view things from an independent point of view to an embedded experience.
Yeah.
Right? The second one is from a single frame of reference to three alternate frame of reference simultaneously.
Say it again.
So from a single frame of reference
Yep.
to three frames of reference simultaneously.
Right, so they coexist.
Yeah, they coexist at the same time. And the third one is consideration of the negative space.
Right.
So most of us focus on the positive form. So we focus on the glass.
Yes.
So this is a glass of water.
Yes.
Right? But if we put something different in it, it's a glass of something else. It's still a glass,
Right.
but its purpose is different because it's got a different liquid in. And so so a room in a house, right?
Yes.
The room is the wall, that's the positive form, but what we actually use is the negative space.
Right. So it's not negative as in bad.
Bad, no. It's what we don't see.
Right.
Right?
And space is full of that.
And space is full of that.
Yes.
So, and that's what the three frames of reference are. And that's what realm theory is.
Okay.
Is having the different frames of reference. But when you look at anything in its complexity, it's simultaneously.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
It's coming together. So we have this independent frame of reference.
From an independent to an embedded experience.
From an independent to an embedded. Embedded meaning from me.
Yes. Which
out.
is,
There's one frame, but three all at the same time.
Yep.
And that we also have almost like the positive container, but also the negative container.
Yeah.
Container all at the same time, and they're together at the same time.
Yes.
Right?
Yep. So, for instance, I'll give you an example from psychology.
Cool.
So, So a child comes in because they're misbehaving at school, right? So if we just look from one frame of reference, and in psychology we're really trained to look at that individual because psychology is about the individual. Mm-hmm. But anyone that knows children, their behaviour is a reflection of what's happening around them, right? If we don't consider that,
yes,
then we're not going to help that child.
No.
And yet we tend to focus just on that child. And a lot of people will say, you know, the problem child is the squeaky wheel of the family.
No.
You've heard that?
Yes, but it's the indicator of...
It's the indicator of something.
So I've had this emerging hypothesis which I've floated in the podcast recently, which is that our mental health, our rising mental health stats, depression, anxiety, suicide, is an appropriate response to a traumatic and crazy society.
Totally. The system... The system dictates what happens to the individuals within that system. So if you have a toxic work environment,
yes,
you will have a lot of people with health problems.
Yes.
Right? And so realm theory can be applied to all of those things to actually, and it's, so when I said, you know, we each have our own nature, place and purpose, a business will have its own nature, place and purpose.
Yes.
And if they live true to that,
yeah,
then people within it will be healthy.
Yeah.
Right? Schools have their own nature, place and purpose. And, you know, the way we actually educate, the way we focus so much in society goes against all the natural laws.
Very individually focused.
Yeah, and it creates fragmentation. So it creates fragmentation within people, but it also creates fragmentation within inside your brain, which, when our brain is fragmented, leads to mental illness. And so I actually learnt this from Aboriginal elders about the connection. So I'd done like 8 years of formal studies in psychology, plus all this time practicing and talking to people and that. And, you know, most of psychology is based on talking therapies.
Yes.
Which assumes verbal and conscious.
Yes.
Except the verbal conscious centres of our brain is a very small part of our brain.
Yeah.
The rest of it is unconscious and non-verbal.
Yep. And embodied as too. Wow,
yeah. So while we focus on one, we're actually neglecting everything else.
Yeah.
And one of the fundamental things with Aboriginal culture is everything has art, song, dance, story and language. Right? When we do that, so when we learn something, and I spoke to you on the phone yesterday, so when I was trying to get my head around realm theory, I did the paintings. I also actually danced realm theory because that's embedding it, so it connects everything in my mind, right? We can't just learn it from a book. We can't just have, oh, this is your learning objectives, here's your outcome.
Yes.
Because that's not about life. That's about fragmentations of life.
Yes. Which is part of why I crack the shits with individually focused coaching and many of these things. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, which is why...
What's your goal in life?
Yeah. Well, and which is why a lot of the healing programs I do now is group-based, because everyone's learning from everyone else and it's all interconnected.
Yes.
And so we have such better outcomes. So I had someone just in the last week that I have been seeing for 15 years in individual practice. And like, I think I'm fairly good at the individual practice. But we knew that there was this one thing that just wasn't working. And I said, look, come to the group. And she's like, there's no point in coming to the group. I know everything you're going to say. She came to the group, and on the second day, it was so obvious what the issue was. which she had never thought about consciously, never talked about, and it was a total fear of going out into nature. So she was telling me she needed to go out into nature to feel connected, but she was never actually doing it.
Right.
Because there was this overwhelming fear that she hadn't even identified. Once we did that, I've seen her now and she's like, everything's come together. And, you know, I've been seeing her for 15 years, once a month. In the beginning, I saw her a lot.
Yeah.
But, you know, and even like I knew there was something not right, but everything I tried in that 1 hour session didn't get there.
Yeah.
But in a group where we're just doing art and song, dance, and all of that, it became so obvious.
And there really is something about having other people, and, you know, we can't identify ourselves and see ourselves in a vacuum.
No.
We do it by brushing up against others.
Totally.
Which, yeah, I go back to 11 years of being in a boys' boarding school. I was doing all day, every day.
Yeah. But
Some
then
things weren't healthy in there, trust me. But other bits.
But that's still very singular mindset.
Yes.
And we tend to feel really, really comfortable talking to people like us. But the real, challenge and expansion is talking to people not like us. And that is just like, wow. And
there's nervous system in there to play with.
Oh, absolutely, because you're actually stepping outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
You know,
and it's threatening our safety, who we are, our belonging, our dignity, and any of that switches, and then it's sympathetic nervous system closed down.
Totally.
Yeah,
I don't want to be here.
I'm off to my moral high ground. I'm judging you. I'm comparing you. I'm doing all the things to make me feel safe now.
Yeah, and as soon as we do that, we disconnect.
Correct.
Right? Realm theory is about connection of everything. Because at an energetic level, we are all connected all the time.
Yes.
And it's only in our mind that we're in this high ground.
Yes.
But it disconnects us, which then impacts.
Or so we think.
Or yes, yes, totally. We think, but.
Because talking to Sean the other week, he was very clear with me about even when you feel disconnected from spirit, spirit's always with you and through you.
Yes, exactly. But we can, consciously we disconnect. Unconsciously we're still connected, right? So that we can actually disconnect our actions from our thinking. Well, even within our actions, we can, and you'll know people that will say one thing and do another.
Yes.
That's a disconnection. It's not in alignment. And then, people will think something, they'll say something, but that's not how they actually feel. And we just go down the layers until we get to this energetic level, which is where this all sort of sits.
This is awesome. I love this. It just calls me in. Right then. Should we go into these?
Yes.
Are we ready?
I don't know. Do you feel like you're ready?
Yes.
All right. So, the 3 realms.
Yes.
I have defined them as realm 1 is everything with form and substance.
Right.
That's everything we can define.
Right.
And that's in the here and now, in reality. Right? I commonly call that our everyday reality.
Yeah.
Right? Realm 2 is everything with form, with no substance, and everything with substance with no form. Right?
Right.
Okay, so the things that have form and no substance is energy, is one of them. Electrical energy. You can't hold on to it.
Yes.
We can see the impact of it, but it actually has no substance.
So does that have
It has form.
Form.
Well, when we measure it, we can get a waveform.
Yeah,
we can get,
but it has no substance.
It has no substance.
Yeah.
It weighs nothing.
Yeah.
It has no mass.
Right. So simultaneously, there are things that have no form, but have
substance. And
Give
this
an
is a
example.
really interesting one.
So are we now in that negative space?
Yes.
I'm anchoring it back to the...
Yeah, we're in the negative space. So in quantum physics, or no, it's not actually, it's universal physics, where they've actually discovered by calculation that there's a mass in the universe where we can't define, right? In realm theory, I've actually used the word Hawley to describe it, and I've chosen that word. In quantum physics and stuff like that, some call it dark energy, dark matter. There's lots and lots of different names for it. I've actually chosen to call it Hawley from Aristotle, about 2,000 years ago, and he described Hawley as the substance in our brain that's not thoughts.
Right.
Right? And then another researcher also who was wrote a book about the history of the mind, he talks about Hawley.
Right.
And because I'm a psychologist, that sort of fits.
Yeah.
And so I've called it Hawley.
So we have energy and Hawley.
And Hawley.
Okay, so that's the second round.
That's the second
Just
realm.
dial me back into the first one. That was...
So that's everything with form and substance together.
So that's like the universal set.
Yep, that's this glass, the water in it, the table, you, me.
Everything.
Yeah. But your thoughts are energy.
Right. So that's when we go to round two
Two.
and start to delineate.
Yes, but where you're a whole person,
Yes.
and if we took all the electrical out,
Yeah.
you don't exist.
Yes.
Or the energy out.
Yes. So now we're talking
So
different
there's-
perspectives.
Yeah, and that's what I say. We have to consider the different frames of reference simultaneously.
Yes. So when
And yet
people say, "Oh, I'm just electrical impulses," well, technically,
So
yes, but not.
Yeah. Or, I'm just this physical form. Well,
You're not just the physical.
Physical
You have
form.
the electrical stuff going through you.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in so an example of the Hawley is something that has no form. So if you think about dreams, right? Have you ever had a dream where you've woken up in the morning and you are either furiously angry
Yep.
or sad?
Yep.
That's an example of the Hawley. It has
Right.
substance because it's impacted you,
Yes.
but it has no form. We can't go, here's your dream. It's throughout. Now, yeah. So, and realm two is dual. So everything in realm two is dual because of this,
Dual.
as in
Yeah.
two sides.
Yes.
And so we have energy and Hawley above and below. And the above and below are just terms to signify it's above and below everyday reality,
Right.
really. But it's because, like, realm one, time is linear and space is three-dimensional, right? In realm two,
Yep.
time and space expand and contract.
Right.
So have you ever had the experience of driving somewhere and it's taken 6 times longer than you thought it should?
Yep.
Or that, and this
Or been
often
so
so
engrossed.
gross that it's
Done.
done,
Yeah.
right?
And similarly, you can take substances which do that for you.
Totally.
You can drink a load of beer,
Yeah,
and then the
yeah.
next thing you know, it's 1 a.m. in the morning. You're like,
Yeah.
what did that happen?
Yeah. So, and in other cultures, so my daughter-in-law is Indonesian, and they have a saying over there that time's elastic.
Yeah.
So much of their life is actually in realm two, whereas so much of our life is in realm one.
Yes.
We have time's linear, we have schedules, we have this, and it actually disconnects us from realm two,
Yes.
which is everything, well, form without substance or substance without form. The other part of realm two, so I would say like the duality is like the duality between quantum physics and the collective unconscious.
Right.
So
Expand that one.
the quantum physics is the energy, the collective unconscious is the Hawley. Right? And so I've read, this is from another book, there's a psychologist, researcher, Pribram, and he's written, his whole research is for the last 20 years of his life is about holonomic brain,
Right.
which is how everything's connected but everything is within everything else.
Yes.
And so he wrote this book.
Like a fractal.
Yeah, it's a fractal.
Yes.
Yeah. So he wrote this book about the brain and being. And in there, he's interviewed a quantum physicist. Well, there's just this little bit. And they discussed that the further you go into psychology, the closer you get to quantum physics. And the quantum physicist said the further in you go for quantum physics, you get to the consciousness.
Right.
And this is the round 2 part. Yeah.
So is this what, certainly when you talk about Hawley and dreams,
yeah.
and then through my knowledge of reading Jung, we
Yeah.
get into
The collective
and we get into
archetypes. Yes.
that then are like,
Yeah. And then metaphors fit into there as well.
yes.
Yeah. And our stories. So, you know,
But
our
yet, archetypes only seem to illuminate when some energy
hits it.
hits it.
Because
They
they're
sit there dormantly.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
moving very.
Well, we don't, yeah. And it only activates when energy, except it's actually the other way around, because Hawley is the pattern that energy must follow.
Oh. And that's how we've got into patterns here, hasn't it?
Yes.
Oh, this is good.
So
Yeah.
Hawley is the pattern that the energy must follow. So the Hawley is like a blueprint in us that the
Right.
energy must follow. And so if we get imprinted in a really negative way, our energy follows that.
What, so if we take on somebody
Else's
else's or an external blueprint,
Yes. Which,
and then that's when we can have a disconnect
yeah, and
from
we
our true nature.
totally.
So if we now go back to, if I'm racing
Yeah.
around, so if we now go back to my whole pull around that age between 37 and 42, the way I've described that is that it's almost a realignment period where two things start to come crashing in on themselves. One is all the stories that we've picked up from everybody else,
Yeah.
whether it's mum, dad, best friend, teacher,
Yeah.
careers advisor, and then onwards from there, society, etc., etc. You get to a place where, like, well, I've done the thing, but I'm not getting the result, and it's not quite, and also it's leaving me feeling hollow.
Yeah.
But then there's another really important part, which is the way I've described it, is that it's round about 30, what I'd say is 35, 36 before this, is the apex of the individual power.
Yes.
Which is where we've defined this identity based on I am this, not that, and I'm that, not this. And then all of a sudden, so I'm good, I'm not bad, I'm generous, I'm not stingy, I'm these things. And that's when we're pushing our shadow away.
Yep.
And denying part of our true nature. And then all of that stuff that you've chucked into boxes and chucked into the, down below, and it starts to stinking up the joint, all of a sudden goes, we want some fucking time.
Yeah.
Now we want some time to shine. And you come out and then you start acting in very strange ways. And all of a sudden things that were important yesterday are no longer important today.
Yeah.
And to me it all just kind of made sense now. It's still difficult to, that's the best of my articulation I've just shared with you today. Right.
Yeah.
But now there's this sort of, if there are parts of, if there's So if I'm understanding you, if there are almost imprints of blueprints of Hawley
Yeah.
that is diverting energy,
Yes.
and at the same time we're only forcing energy into parts of our blueprint but denying other parts of our
Yep.
thing, then there's going to come a point where the whole of the imprint goes, right, off to the external stories, and this energy is flowing through all of me, good,
Yes.
bad or indifference, but that's your judgment, opinion, this is just who you are.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Or is that how you interpret
well,
it?
yeah, that's yeah. It's having the imprint of someone else that leads you to not living your true life.
Yes.
Right? And it happens so subtly and easily. And it can be as simple as, oh, you're just like your father
Oh, yeah.
when you're growing up, or you're this. And so many people try to define what you are. So I was really good at maths.
Yeah.
I was really great at computer programming. And my lecturer in computer programming was just like, you would make the top he
Yeah.
was actually stealing my programs to teach.
Yeah.
And I would just look at him and go, well, that's not who I am. I'm not going to sit and be a computer programmer. But they couldn't see that. Similarly, my son was very good at maths, but he was also really good at drama and stuff. But the teachers kept saying, oh, you can be a doctor, you can be a doctor. He has absolutely no inkling about health, medical, like it was so far from who he was.
Yes.
And I'm like, why can't you teachers see that? But it was based on a grade.
Yes.
And so people don't see whole people. Right? And it happens in all walks, all levels of society and everything. We also have, and you touched on it, about the story, but the story of our family. So it can be generational. That's passed through. And we see repeating patterns in families.
Yes.
And that's part of that, the Hawley that's been passed on.
Yeah.
And because it's when we give the story meaning.
Yes. Is that when we give the
story
some energy?
Yes. And then it manifests.
And then it comes to round one.
Yeah.
And it
manifests, and then we do the things we go, I would never have done that.
Yeah.
Why did I do that?
Yeah. And then your partner goes, yeah, just like your dad, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yep, all of that.
Something
Yes.
your dad did, or your mum
Yeah.
did.
So that's round 2. So then round 3 is...
Just one second before we hop into round 3. There's a question, and I don't know how to articulate it here, but there's some... Are we overstating the role of passing genetics?
So genetics have energy and Hawley in them.
Right.
So this pattern is in everything. So it's in the cell, it's in the genetics, it's in us, it's in our families, in the system, it's in everything.
Right. Okay, cool. Can you see where I was like...
Yeah.
Because we often go, oh, it's just passed the genes from one person to another, and then I'm listening to you, I'm like, oh no, it's passed the Hawley down.
Yeah, but
then,
the genes because everything has energy, Hawley, and all of that in.
Right. So now we're into round 3.
Okay, so round 3 is everything with no form and no substance.
So, no form.
And no substance.
Right.
So that is time.
Right, yes.
Space.
Yep.
And the third one of this I've called omneity,
Yep.
which just means everything with no form and no substance that's not time or space.
Can you give me an example?
No, because I don't know what it is.
Right.
But so in theory, there should be
so it's everything that has
no form and no substance. That's not time and space.
There's also not time
and not space.
And not space.
Yeah.
Oh, it's exciting to even consider.
Yeah, and that's how, so if someone discovers something else that has that's part of the omneity.
Yes. What's the origins of the word omneity?
Well, it was often used as in universe, God,
right.
all of that. But I didn't want it to have a religious thing. It's just something that's like,
okay.
like that. So.
Yeah.
And so now I said realm 2 was dual. This realm is actually triple.
Yeah.
Right. So it actually, this is, I'm trying to think of a concrete example. So in here, time is actually infinite.
Right.
Space is infinite. And
because
so
it's not got
yeah.
the form.
And so have you heard of string theory, brain theory? So they talk about infinite dimensions.
Yes.
So that's where this comes in. It just goes forever.
Yes.
And yeah, and it's in this one it's here, there. Well, for space it's here, there, and nowhere.
Yeah.
For time it's here, there, and no when.
Yeah.
And for the omneity it's here, there, and no why.
Right. So they're all here and there.
Yeah.
And then no why.
There's no reason for it.
Yes. Can't make that point. And there's no time.
Which is no when.
No when.
So you can't.
And then there's
no
where.
So in the beginning I said there's 3 realms and then 3 worlds. So that's technically there's actually like 9 worlds in realm 3 because it's a 3 by 3 by 3.
Yes.
Well, actually,
1,
27.
2, so there's 1, 2, 3, and then
27.
Yeah.
Because it's a 3 by 3 by 3.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Right. And so that's where the complexity comes in.
Yeah.
But if you want to do stuff in the everyday reality, we have to consider those other ones within this here. So we have to consider it within this glass, within you.
So how would we do that?
So, so within you, because this is the area that I work in. So, for instance, with someone with post-traumatic stress disorder,
right,
the time's distorted. They relive the event from previous.
Then.
But from then.
Not
yep.
here.
Not here.
Then.
Yep. Which is there.
Yeah.
But the there comes to here.
Yes.
So we actually have to switch them back to heal them.
My here stays here and my there goes there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's similarly with the energy, right? So often people with depression have decreased energy, right? So that's a realm 2 issue, not a realm 1 issue.
Right.
And so then we have to identify the root cause of the no energy. So is it a physical illness?
Yes.
Right? Because often I get people referred to for depression and I'm like, And, I've had people actually be diabetic.
Yes.
And other things. And I'm going, well, it's not. They've got low energy because they're diabetic.
Yeah.
Right? But we look at, is there too much, like basically too much Hawley and not enough energy? That sort of balance.
Right.
So in realm 2, it's about getting balance and harmony.
Right.
For you to function well in your life. And realm 1 is where we identify things that have happened in the past, or what your life looks like.
Right.
And then the impact of the energy in Hawley that influence that. And then look for the time distortions or space distortion, round 3. Yeah.
Right, it's beginning to come to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, but before you can do any of that, the number one thing is for it all to be combined is the relationship between you and me. Because we can't do anything until we've got a relationship.
Right.
Right? And in therapy, it's called the therapeutic relationship.
Yeah.
In business, it's called business relationships. You have to actually have that relationship before anything really happens.
Yes. And if that's not in place.
Yeah. And the relationship is built on all 3 realms.
Which kind of falls in it. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's quite difficult to explain in a linear fashion when it's so non-linear.
Yes.
And
well, you said something to me just before we started this recording, which was you always have to build the mindset to meet the theory.
Yes.
Which, as you said before, is that a form of brainwashing?
Yes. And I would argue no, because what we do isn't about teaching you how to think or what to think or anything like that. All we do with the work I do is connect you to your nature, place and purpose, which is connecting you to your part, your place in the whole pattern.
Yes.
Right? Because I can't see the pattern from your point of view.
No.
Because I can only see it from here.
Yeah.
Right? So it's no good me, and so brainwashing and all that is me teaching you my pattern.
Yes.
That's useless to you.
Again, we're back to imprinting Hawley.
Yeah, exactly. And yet so much of our teachings are exactly that. Imprinting. And it might not work for you. Right? So it's connecting to your core nature that allows me to see what things I would do with you to open up and for you to connect to your truth.
So instead of this, I have a theory of how your life should map out,
not at all.
Imprint it upon it.
No.
It's more a case of being curious about the energy patterns, the makeup of you, and co-exploring that.
Yes.
Then we can open up possibilities.
Yes.
So if I do introduce anything, it's because I'm co-exploring and I've just had an idea that might open something up.
Yeah. And so it isn't about one size fitting all at all. Right? And so a lot of the things we get people to do are experiential. So we might do a task, which might be something like paint anger, for instance. And then so everyone's anger would look different.
Yeah.
Right? And then write a poem about it. So it's connecting into your deepest unconscious, which is not mine. Right? Although, having worked as a psychologist for so long, there are common patterns.
Yes.
Right? And, there's been a lot in the paper about like domestic violence and that. I can pick that pattern really easily. And so I know what questions to ask people so that they can see what's going on.
Yes.
Right? Whereas if I just said, oh, you're in a domestic violent relationship, they go, no, we're not.
As opposed to asking them the questions for them to surface it for themselves.
Yes.
Because how often have many of us been in the middle of something? When somebody comes in and asks you a question, you suddenly realise this is not right.
Yeah, it was like when you asked me a question yesterday, when we had that chat on the phone, it was like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought of it in that way. And that was in terms of, like, because we were talking a little bit about complexity theory and how that feeds in. And that's when I really thought, wow, we really have to develop our minds to be able to see complexity.
Yes.
And when all our education and all our focus and everything throughout our life is to look within, right?
And reduce.
And reduce down,
Yeah.
which is analysis to find out how it works, where it's now time for synthesis.
Yes.
We need to synthesize the knowledge together.
And it's interesting because if you... So I got in a debate with somebody who pulls experts so
Yep.
you can link them to the news
Yep.
and help them to put their message out. And it struck me that the definition of an expert was somebody who could drill down into it. Yet, and you know, that is put on a pedestal because, you know, people have many letters after their name, because the more letters they have, the more finer into the
Yep.
into the reduction they've gone to. Yet what it struck me is that we seem to lack lateral experts, if we even want to call them an expert.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so true in so many areas. And so, you know, I worked in suicide prevention, youth suicide prevention a long time ago. And I remember being at this meeting and this politician came up to me and said, so how do we solve the youth suicide problem? And I said, well, it's quite complex because there's a... And he says, I don't want to hear that. I just want one thing that I can do now to fix it. And I just looked at him and walked away. Because there's not one thing. Because every single person is different.
Yes.
People experience life differently.
Yet, and I've spoken about this frequently, yet we are conditioned to look for the one thing. Sales and marketing is based on the one thing, or the 3 secrets to, or do this and in 8 weeks. But life just does not work that way.
No.
There is interrelated and complexity. And if the last 12, 18 months has shown us anything, and shone a bright light of energy through the Hawley.
Yeah, exactly.
Is the interconnectedness of everything, of how we work. You start one thing and then another problem arises, and another problem arises, and another problem arises. And so this is, I think this is why it's come to the fore for me, because I've been through this almost like unsure denial type phase, and that's like, no, this is serious now. And then it leaves you wondering, like, being an individual reduction expert is useful, but then how do we connect that? And I think I'll probably get off a bit now, but one of the challenges I have felt is our response to many of the things that have happened over the last 12 to 18 months have been stuck around the individual reduction viewpoints, and has left me thinking, well, when are the grown-ups going to turn up? When are the adults with a sense of perspective across all of this? Almost like the elders. When are they going to turn up and go, all right, boys and girls, right, this is going to be difficult, and we are going to have to take some uncomfort and some risk and something over here, but for the better good, and how this connects, and this, that, and the other. And you know, I had a chat with a young gentleman only last week about the period between 37 and 43. And one of the first things I caveated it with was, this may trigger you. And he asked why, and I said, because in order to listen to what I've got to tell you, you have to recognize that I am older than you, and with that comes some more experience. And so I've done stuff you've not. And this is not some, like, I've run a business or something. I've just been through this life thing, and I've explored the stories of others. And we don't like doing that anymore. You know, since the 60s and the postmodern, you know, stick it to
Yeah.
the man,
Yep.
kick back. Fuck that.
Yeah.
So, you know, we seem to have mistaken growth and power hierarchies and smashed them both down,
Yep.
where growth hierarchies, they still go on and they have merit. And, you know, there's a big argument that a lot of our culture wars at the moment are because all the different
But, yeah.
parts are all arguing that their place is better than the other, and we're not just going, well, dude, like, try
Yeah.
growing up.
And-
In 16 years' time, you're going to look at this differently.
Yeah, and that's I suppose, the difference between competitive hierarchies,
Yes.
right, where everyone's competing for that one top spot,
Yeah.
and circular collaborations, where everyone's valued for their contribution to it, and
Yes.
no one person has all the answers.
Well, yeah, now we're in another pet topic of mine about collective knowledge, collective
Yes.
wisdom, and the idea of distributed cognition
Yeah,
amongst different people.
yeah, and you know
Because we're all one part of
Of
a
that bit.
pattern.
Yeah,
The pattern exists in us
Yep.
as a fractal,
yes,
but we can't execute all of it
no,
in us.
not at all. And you know, we often talk about we are one of one. But we are one of one. So we are part of everything, but we still have our part to play.
Yes.
And it is lateral. There isn't the hierarchy that we seem to live under, that, you know, this person's better than this person because they've got more money or they've got longer hair or whatever it is. We have these hierarchies in everything. And what do they actually serve? You know, what do they serve? They serve the system of hierarchies.
Yes.
And it gets really frustrating to have this when, you know, there are alternative ways. And it's been shown time and time again that these other ways work just as well.
Yeah. Can you give me some sort of examples?
Team sports,
Yes.
right? The team, you know, there's been teams that have become world champions that have not had one single star in them,
Yes.
right? That's them all working together, all knowing their job in that team.
Yes.
So each person knows their nature, place and purpose in that team,
Right.
right? The coach
I think-
knows the nature,
And I
place
think
and
most people will have felt that if they've played team sports.
Yes.
That there's times when it's all harmonious and everyone does their
That-
role, and there are times when there are either A, people who don't,
Yep.
or B, overextend their role.
Yeah, and then you get some people that, you know, when there is a star player in that team and they become conceited about it, the team doesn't support them anymore.
Yeah.
Even if they're not consciously doing it, unconsciously they're doing it. Right? And so that's an example of when people work together. And it happens every time there's like a natural disaster.
Yes.
Even with COVID, everyone worked together.
So, 1998, I went to South America. I went to a place called Montanita in Ecuador, right?
Yep.
And it was El Nino time.
Yep.
And I went there at one point and went there a couple of weeks later with my father, who came over. And just as I left, the rivers were washing the bridges away, this, that, the electricity had gone off, this,
Yeah.
that, blah, blah, blah. Came back 10 days later and the electricity was still off. And on the 11th day we were there, electricity comes back on and all this sort of
Yeah.
stuff. And whilst most of us were like, oh, that's great, we can get a cold beer and stuff like that, and we're going to play some music.
Yeah.
They kind of enjoyed it, but they were also at the same time, most of the people who lived in that town, small little village
Yeah.
on the coast, were quite disappointed. And it's like, well, I spoke to this guy because my Spanish was good enough grip, and he was like, well, when all the electricity stops, when the bridges stop, this, that, and the other, then everybody puts their money to one side, and we just make food for one another. We eat chicken and rice, and we play volleyball all day, and we have such a laugh. And then when this comes back, then we're going to have to go back to these roles that separate each other.
Exactly. So our house got destroyed in a tornado a number of years ago, right? And it was so surreal, but also quite amazing, because all the fences in our neighbourhood went down. And so these neighbours that lived behind us and all that, who I'd never met, we're all congregated in the backyard every morning having our morning coffee.
Yeah.
Like everyone's in their dressing gowns, and it was just so real. And then as soon as the fences go back up, we go into our little worlds and off we go. You know, and people from, you know, the night it happened, we had someone from another neighbourhood coming around, and they'd cooked up, I don't know, 30 kilos of sausages with bread, saying, "Is anyone hungry?"
Yeah.
We had this group of like 5 young men, don't know who they were at all, could see that there was a whole pile of rubbish, and they just went and cleaned it up, and they just came in, cleaned it up, walked on to the next place.
So the things that we've just described, how do we place that in the theory that we've just done?
Yeah.
So that we've really pulled some nice stuff out there.
Yeah.
So how do we place it and use it?
So, you know, while we have an individual nature, place and purpose, humanity has a nature, place and purpose.
Yes.
And human beings' nature is to be inquisitive,
Yes.
emotional,
Yes. I'll write this down.
social, and patient. Well, impatient actually. We're actually wired to be impatient. We want everything done yesterday. So when we live according to that, we grow.
Right.
Right? So that's our nature.
Inquisitive, emotional,
social, and impatient.
social, and patient. Yeah.
So that's our human beings' nature is that. Humans' place is as part of in the web. Yeah, in the web of life.
Yeah.
Like we're no better or no worse than any other living thing.
Yeah.
And so when we start to think we're more important than something else, we lose connection with our nature, with our web, you know? And so, and our purpose is as terrors of the world.
Right.
Right? And so when a natural disaster comes, we do all these things.
Yes.
Automatically. We care. We care without judgment.
We impatiently fix things, we get social,
Social,
we get emotionally driven, and we get inquisitive.
Yeah, on how to do it better. And we care for one another.
Yes.
Right? But when we're separated, that's where the fragmentation comes in, and we start to be distrustful of everyone. You know,
What drives that fragmentation then? Is that almost like this imprinted Hawley?
Yeah, probably, because we're actually taught to fear others.
Yeah. So it's almost like this self-perpetuating thing that's because I have. So here's a great example, right? So it's easy for those. It's easy if you want to drop into the world of conspiracies and things, right?
Yep.
Q drops, all that sort of stuff, right? To go, there is a small amount of people running the world, right? And yet, I considered that for a while. Yet, for me, it strikes me, and one of our podcast guests put really nicely. Like, let's just take consumer capitalism, right?
Yeah.
Really sort of birthed after the Second World War, particularly from people like Edward Bernays, who was the nephew of Freud.
Yeah.
And there is a real, and as Richard put across, Richard was the guest, there's a real Freudian nature in consumer capitalism and object fetishism, which is, you know, I am lacking of a thing, I need to feel whole, so I need to buy that thing and put it in me, whether it's an object, a training, a book, a knowledge, or
whatever,
or whatever it is. Now, so that was probably actively commenced
Yep.
in the sort of like 50s, 60s, and that's where we get stuff like, you know, Mad Men and the ad guys and stuff
Yep.
like that, which is awesome. Awesome little show. And but these things have gained the momentum, right?
Yep.
Now, those guys created something, right? And it was powerful, and it was put into the world. But those guys are dead now. They've gone. But this thing seems to
because
have...
that's their legacy.
Yeah, and this thing seems to have continued to have gained momentum, and has got bigger and bigger and bigger. So what you're telling me when you tell me there's a conspiracy is that there's someone in the middle holding the steering wheel. I would grant that there are people who can knock it from one side to another, and people can surf it really, really well. But this thing's out of control.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I suddenly get to the point of, where are the grown-ups who look at this and go, boys and girls,
Yep.
you're playing a game that's not really...
Yep.
We all need to just calm the farm, you know.
Yep.
You could say social media is another one where it seems to be this entity, and we've witnessed that. I mean, certainly you and I in our lifetime, we've witnessed that, you know, having a pre-digital memory. We've witnessed this, not only the internet turning up, which is like one thing, but then this social media thing turned up.
Yeah. Well, see, when I was young, we didn't even have television.
There you go.
So
Yeah.
we had, well, we did technically have television, but I lived
You
in
didn't.
a country area, and television was, well, we only had electricity when we put on the generator, so it was like an hour a day.
So is this where, so would we be interpreting this where, you know, almost like these things of Hawley has been...
Yeah, but it comes down to, so the realm theory is based on quantum chaos.
Yes.
Right. Quantum chaos has some very fundamental, scientifically proven, like, principles, right? And one of them is, like, don't take more than you need. And when we violate any of those laws, right, any of them, we isolate, we fragment, and then we disintegrate.
Yeah, that's where we get the second law of thermodynamics, don't we?
Yes, exactly.
A closed system
Yeah.
will always disintegrate.
Yeah. And if you want to look at it more, I don't know. So have you heard of the term self-organisation?
Yes.
Yeah. So everything self-organises, right?
Yeah.
And so the self-organisation of the earth is far greater than the self-organisation of humans,
Yes.
right? So, you know, in what you're talking about, we could argue that the self-organisation of the earth is creating this thing for us to isolate, fragment and disintegrate, to remove the humans off the earth. So for the self-organisation of the earth, because we keep just like destroying part, whatever.
Right.
So you could go that far. So there's multiple levels you could go to about this. And if we're trying to find one simple, like, solution, my simple solution would be, like, everyone just find their own nature, place and purpose and live from there.
Yeah. If you had to reduce it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, so there's multiple
and
ways.
And that's your own nature, like, within this collective.
So there's a collective nature, place and purpose of humans.
Yeah.
And then within that, we're all got our own nature, place and purpose. And, you know, within that, our liver has a nature, place and purpose in our body. Like, everything has its own nature, place and purpose within everything.
This is where, we get the different holons. Yeah.
And it just, but the really interesting thing, according to realm theory, all of them will have the same core nature as you. So our liver will have the same core nature as our body.
Right. When you say core nature.
Yeah, so that's part of the energy pattern.
Right.
They'll all be connected. And each of them will be a reflection of the universe. I don't think you quite got to that part on the paper.
No, not
but
quite.
That's all right. So, it does, you know, the more you get into it, the more there is.
Yes.
And once again, that's from my perspective, from my part in the pattern. That's what I see.
Yes.
But you might get there and go, well, that's not what I see. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so you do what you see, I do what I see. There's no drama about that.
There is, if I dial back out of this conversation and take some of the, like even some of the core basic things about us being connected and having our own role. I mean, the very nature of the fact that, you know, we know that we're all different, yet we're all remarkably similar.
Yeah.
You know, the 80-20 rule probably stands.
Yeah.
That, you know, 80% completely the same, 20% different, despite the fact that we like to overextend that 20% nowadays. There's just, even if you sit with that and let it sink in, it really it's quite calming.
Yeah. So, you know, I often say life is actually really simple. Any amoeba, which is a single cell organism, lives. Us humans have complicated it so much that we've lost how to live. And so, for instance, we have an obesity epidemic, right? That's because we're eating more than our body needs.
Back to
our nature.
Yeah.
You know?
We're taking more than we need.
Yeah. Right? You know, some of us don't even breathe properly. A lot of it, well, there's pollution for one, but also we don't use our body how it was designed to be used. And there's just so many things like that, right?
And yet we cover it over with bullshit stories.
Yeah. And we say it's genetics or it's this medication. Like, the bottom line is we're taking more than we need. Or, you know, we're thinking we're better than someone else or less than someone else, and that creates a lot of the social issues.
Yes. Yes.
Right. Because we walk down the street, we see a homeless person, and we turn away. A lot of people.
With the advent of, and I like to test and play with stuff, right? Yeah. With the advent of modern medicine and hospitals and life support machines, are we in danger of taking more life than we need?
Possibly, yeah. Possibly.
You know?
Yeah.
Because you can put this into the whole COVID and vaccine and places like that. Yeah. You know, do we actually need that, or do we
allow people to die out?
Yeah.
Then that becomes a very ethical question, because it's fine on a global level. Oh yeah, our population is this, we need to reduce it by 20%.
Yeah, that's great until it comes to your granny.
Exactly.
Or your mum.
Yes. Because for you, those people are more important than other people.
Yes.
But on the big scheme of things, everyone's actually of equal, like have equal value. And so if we live like that, but it's interesting on that thing about the medical and that. So we have people making decisions that allow people to die or live now. And it was really interesting because people, this is going back to my time working with hospitals and having the hospital board to set the parameters, because people will say, oh, doctors need to do it and all that. But they've actually found that if you lay out all the facts for people, so they've got this amount of money, right, whatever that money is, do we use it to save this 105-year-old, or do we use the money to save 5 children? Most adult people can make those sorts of decisions on where the money goes.
Yeah.
Right? But then we make it political.
Yeah.
And then it just goes on and on.
It disappears.
And and all of these are violations of quantum chaos or the natural laws of the universe. And so, we just need to live those.
You can see how, certainly Liz soaking this up, that when you consider identity politics and identity issues, that we really are just wrestling with, I mean, if somebody genuinely identifies as one thing or another, but at another level, it's like there is a natural law in this.
Yeah, and that's why Sean describes himself as a human being.
Yes.
And people go, but why aren't you describing yourself as an Aboriginal man? Well, yeah, but I'm a human being first.
Yes. Yes.
And, and before that, we're a living entity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So,
bringing it out.
Yeah, and we, and if we look at the world that way, like we're all human beings, we develop that compassion and empathy for the other person. But if we identify as we're this, automatically it sets up an us and them.
Yes.
Which then divides us.
Yes.
So we have divisions through race and sex and bike riders and car drivers.
Yeah.
It's all artificial. And, if we just remember that, and, that's why I can walk in and sit like this with a person that's murdered someone. Or I can walk in and sit like this with someone that's created a new album of music. Everyone is just equal. So, yeah.
That'd be very triggering for some, won't it?
Absolutely. And, sat there with child molesters.
Yeah.
And if we truly believe we are one of one, I'm not saying everyone has to do that, but someone has to treat them as people.
Yes.
Otherwise we make it worse. It's like what you started with the shadow side.
Yeah.
As soon as we separate from our shadow, we give it more power.
Yes.
When we separate from criminals and stuff, we give them more power. And so that's part of that whole fragmentation, and it just recreates itself. So.
I'm very much with you there. Very much. Does it get frustrating when you see this happening? You see the patterns in the world, yet you see them being the same errors being replicated and replicated?
That's a fascinating question. I'd like to say no, I don't.
Yeah.
Because if I'm really this, that's what needs to happen.
Yeah.
I can't control that.
Yeah.
But I do get frustrated.
Yeah. Because there's always this restlessness to want to do something and have an impact and change
Yes.
and move things.
Yes. But I think what frustrates me more is people will contact us and say, we need to change this because it's not working, right? And I'll give you an example. An organisation that works with Aboriginal people, right, says we can't keep Aboriginal employees. And so we go, oh, okay. And they said, can you help us? And we were like, yeah, we can do that. And we went in and we actually interviewed some Aboriginal people that had worked for them. We came back and said, your organisation's not actually culturally safe for them. And they turned around and went, yeah, we know that. I said, well, isn't that what you want us to do? They said, no, we want you to make them fit in with us. That frustrates me.
Yes.
Because that absolutely dismisses the needs of that person. Right? yet they're required to employ Aboriginal people because all their clients are Aboriginal, but it's not safe for anyone. So it's actually damaging. That frustrates me.
Yes.
Yeah, seeing people being damaged by the decisions of a few.
Yeah. And I guess that's what we feel when we see, people in senior roles and organisations, particularly if we start going to government and beyond.
Yeah, but even
there.
Even the person making decisions, so, going to school, the person at that front desk has a huge impact. So if you go to enrol your child and they don't want to pay you any attention, you don't want to send your child into that place.
Yeah.
And then you get accused of keeping your child at home, but you're going, it's not safe for my child there.
Yeah.
Right? And so this is, where there's one way school should be, one way psychologist should be, one way business consultant should be. Well, it's just bullshit.
It is.
And we need to be a lot more flexible to allow people to be people and who they are.
And then allow patterns to emerge.
Right? And, I've talked about the core energy pattern. So I know that, based on this realm theory, that, about 1 in 8 people will get me, and the work we do, 100%. They're like, pooh. Another 3 out of 8, so 50% of the population will be really comfortable with what we're doing. Another 30% will be like, oh, it's probably working for some, and then there'll be 10% that go, what a load of shit.
Yeah. And
that's simply based on the energy pattern, because it just means that we're less connected to that person.
Yeah, that bit.
Yeah, it's 3 sections away.
Yeah.
And I can accept that. And so, but if all systems are based on this model, you're only ever going to serve at most 50% of the population.
Yes.
No matter what it is.
Now that's interesting, because I have a felt sense that I've investigated in others that there's a growing emergence of feeling that many of our systems and what have you, whilst originally had the good intent of protecting small minorities, now hold the majority to the ransom, or hold them in the policies and procedures and the rules are down here. And then that extrapolates further, which means that people go, well, okay, I can see how these group of people get certain dispensations for being like this. Fuck it, I'll go and present
like this
to get to this place. And look, I got dragged through the family courts for 2 or 3 years, and that's and there was a lot there, but it frustrated me, because here I am, I'm trying to just almost, dare I say, rationally, okay, well, what do we need to do? How do we need to move on? And there are many others who are like, we agree to disagree, but this, that, the other, or what have you. But you're stuck in having to play this game, which doesn't seem to go anywhere. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Totally. And because that system isn't serving the actual needs of the people, and the one that I said, humans are emotional.
Yeah.
Right? So in family court, there's a lot of emotion caught up.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so if the system doesn't allow you to be emotional, or you don't have a way of processing that emotion, you use the system to manifest it.
Yes.
So if you're emotionally stuck, you want the system to be emotionally stuck.
Yes.
If you are really angry, you want someone to be punished.
Yes. Yes.
Right? And so the system doesn't actually serve the needs of the people, it serves the needs of the system.
Yeah. I met someone recently who is developing a piece of software for mediation dispute resolution, particularly in the family court. And I just said to him, that is going to create far more mental health problems than you would ever imagine. And I just implicitly knew it.
Yeah, because you're only looking at the actual process.
Yeah.
Not the emotional process.
If you don't get the opportunity to go in there and get emotional, that's going to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that somewhere else could well be
yeah.
unproductive to the rest of society.
Yeah. And so we actually need, in all the systems, to look at the humanity within the systems. And so many of our systems have exclusion policies, which make people feel bad. Right? A classic one is our mental health system.
Yes.
So if you have a mental illness, but you also self-medicate with alcohol or drugs because of that mental illness, you try to get service at the mental health service and they will say your primary issue is alcohol and drugs. We can't serve you. But then you go to the alcohol and drug service and they go, but you've got a mental illness. We don't have the ability to
fix that.
Help with that.
Yeah.
We can help with your alcohol and drugs, but we can't help with that. They're interrelated. And so we have this system of exclusion, which goes against the laws of nature for human beings.
Because trying to isolate.
And then we fragment and
yeah.
And it just goes on. The other thing is, the mental health system only sees serious mental health conditions, right? If you don't meet that criteria, where do you go? And your mental health issue might be really detrimental to your family, right? Causing all sorts of problems at work, but it's not serious enough. What does human nature do? You make it worse.
What do you do?
Because you want help.
Yeah, you'll come back 12 months later when it is up there.
And,
there's a burnt, scorched path in your wake.
Yeah. Yeah. So, if all our systems were based on realm theory, which is really about human life.
So how would mental health provision look like in Roslyn's world? Because this is really super interesting to me, because there's I'm going around trying to have coffee catch-ups with people who I know, and the biggest question I ask at the moment is, who is dealing with the biggest questions in Western Australia? Where we're going, how are we developing the human capabilities to face volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous situations? How are we actually embedding? How are we actually even sitting in complexity and interconnectedness, and allowing things to emerge, solutions to emerge, rather than sitting in it for a couple of minutes and then going, it's this, and then plowing a load of ill-funded money onto it, and nobody can help me.
Yep.
It's presented as it's triggering and scary. Some people, most of the people who I have these catch-ups with, some of them are past podcast guests, will entertain me, semi get it.
Yeah.
But then it's who is actually looking at it?
So.
And maybe that's my restlessness of doing again.
Yeah.
So back to what does mental health, and that's one of the ones.
Yeah.
With my hypothesis of this is an appropriate response.
Yeah. And so we need a multitude of alternative models.
Yeah.
Because the mental health system in WA at present is actually in very much a psychiatric model.
DSM
type. Yeah. And the psychiatrists are like they make most of the decisions, right? And it's predominantly for people with schizophrenia, bipolar, and really, really, really severe depression, where they need not just medication, right? They don't deal a lot, like they have programs here and there for things like borderline personality. They don't have things for people that have dissociation and non-specific things because they don't fit into a neat box.
From my experience, there's a lack of proper acknowledgement of the impact of that cluster B personalities.
Oh, there's so much. And so if a person says they need help, an expert shouldn't be saying, no, you don't, which is how it feels for people.
Yeah.
And so, you know, so there needs to be a pathway that people feel like they've got something.
Yes.
And we sort of have the extreme acute area. We don't have services for people with really chronic mental health problems. And they used to get a lot more serviced in hospital or hostel type thing. They've all gone. And they're actually not safe for them in society because they are then preyed on by a lot of organised crime stuff, and there's and so and there's definitely not very much on prevention.
Yes.
If anything at all.
If we see where all the funding goes to, it goes to, like, you know, Beyond Blue and this, that and the others, which is, I'll talk you down off the bridge.
Yeah, but not what to do then.
Yeah. Or what's going on at the start of the process.
No.
Or at the start of the training event.
You know, and they talk about prevention when you're already depressed, when you're already having suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
Like, this is 10 steps back. And so you know, that's where I've done quite a bit of work. And that's, so and we still do, it's a community-based system where we upskill a number of community members so that they, and it's not a treatment at all, but they know not what the person needs, but they have the knowledge and ability to go, that's what you need. Like, these are your, but not even a treat, but this is for prevention.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not talking about people with serious mental illness. They still, and that system works quite well. You go to the doctor refers you on.
Yeah.
But you still have to have a diagnosable mental health condition. You know, that step before, there's this big group of people that know things aren't right.
Yeah.
But they haven't actually, it hasn't developed fully into a fully blown. And that's the area that we need.
And what you're describing now is, I came out of doing a bachelor's degree between 1993 and 1997 at Reading University in England. It was an interesting, I got 2-1. It was an interesting experience. I did well in it, but it didn't flick my switch. It was dealing with what I refer to as top and bottom 5% of society.
And it's this other bit.
It was like the middle bit. And it was like, we never really dealt with that. Yep. What are the patterns that go through life? What are the significant events?
Yes.
What happened, you know, why are we not normalizing the fact that, okay, you're coming up to 37, like, shit's going to get real for you. Stuff's going to happen. And then we talked about, there's another one when you get to sort of 50.
But then there's also the one when you leave school.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden you're supposed to be an adult.
Yeah. And what are we talking about now? Rites of passage. But they're not just rites of passage. They're development phases along the way.
And there's this belief that once people get to this age, everything's developed.
Yeah, 18. Off you pop.
But it goes on, and there's developmental things, and it's in that level we need the more holistic stuff.
Yes. We have to understand patterns.
We need to understand also that the school system doesn't suit all children, right? Or this work environment doesn't suit all people. And so if you come back to, if you know your nature, place and purpose, you can much easier know where you're going to fit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so there's a thing in, and I just love it. Every time I hear Sean or one of the other elders talk about it, I'm like, yes, that's what we need to be doing. So at present, our system is you go into education at 3 and 4, right? And it starts to become like this. And the Aboriginal way was kids up until about 9 or 10 had no law, no formal anything. They were actually observed.
Right.
And they were observed by the elders, the other family members, and they'd be going, he's showing this, and it's consistent over time.
Yeah.
And so let's develop that. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas we tend to put people in little boxes that are predetermined.
Sheep dipping almost, yeah.
And it actually destroys kids. You know, all kids are so inquisitive.
Yeah. They're very social.
They're very social.
Bleeding impatient.
And they're emotional. And if we nurture that...
Yeah.
But what happens when we get to school? My son's a school teacher. He went out on prac. There was a little child, I think it was 7 or 8 years old, and their brother had just died. And the kid came up crying to the teacher, and the teacher said to her, "I'll get over it. He died 3 weeks ago. Get back to your desk." Right? And it's like, so where's... And I understand that teachers can't do that. But when teachers have come through my training, our training, they have a different way of dealing with that. And so, you know, how I talked about we have art, song, dance, story and language. So they will just have, over to the right, a table set up with art stuff.
Yeah.
If a kid is feeling struggling, they're emotional, it's just like, oh, you might need to just go on over there and do some artwork for the next half hour. When you're ready, come back and join the class. And as that's set up with no judgment, no discussion about what's wrong, because that just goes into the story, but it gives the kids a process to deal with the emotions, a very, very natural process. There's no big disclosure, like they just do it, and there's no stigma attached to it. And so by halfway through the year, kids will come in the morning and go, "Miss, I need to draw," and she'll go,
Do that.
and they just do that.
And then come back later.
and do that. So there's these little things that we can do regularly with people without saying, you must do this now. You just have that space for people to be and do what they need to do. Because one thing that my work life has taught me, if we create a space for people, they do what they need to do.
Yeah.
Which is that negative space.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And we don't do that. We give them, we do this. And if we go, no, just sit there. So there's so many things we can do.
So many.
So many things. And it doesn't cost a lot. It doesn't, you know, teachers have woven it through the curriculum. You know, managers who've done the training have just woven it into their workplace.
Yeah.
It's not like it becomes this separate, let's learn about
this
or this. It's just part of life.
Yeah.
Because all of this is just part of life.
It is. And then we can go more gentle on ourselves.
Yeah.
And it can be less stressful, angst provoking, and all sorts.
Yeah. So should we get on to these paintings?
Yes.
What do we have? Yep.
Yep.
All right. So I have 3 paintings, and each one of them is the different realm understanding.
Yes.
So this first one is realm 1 understanding.
Yeah.
And so over here, in this section here,
Yeah.
you'll see that the person's black and white.
Yep.
This is that very simplistic thinking that you started telling me about. You know, you're either good or you're bad.
Ah.
Right? It's
Yeah.
right or wrong. Now, when we're children, we need that simplistic to learn right from wrong.
Yeah.
Right? We've got a little B here. We're connected in. Right? We're still connected,
Yeah.
but our world is quite small. We're quite grounded. We're quite safe.
Yeah.
Right? So this is a linear understanding of life. Then we go into here, and our life becomes bigger.
Yeah.
Right? But we're actually not connected up here at all. And we're not connected here. And then we go into this turmoil state. Right? But this is like our tree of knowledge.
Yep.
So this is it growing here, and then it gets bigger. And this is like, so this is getting bigger as well. And this is our connection to our nature,
Mm-hmm.
the natural world really. But we're sort of free flowing. And then we come over here, and this, our tree of knowledge has gone up to this much higher level.
It's gone through
this, and this is our boundary. So this is
of
everyday reality. So
Yeah.
this is our everyday reality. Under here is the below, and in the below there's 3 substances of Hawley and 1 of energy, but we don't really need to get into
Yep.
that. And up here is the above, which has 3 forms of energy and 1 substance of Hawley, right? And so we go through and we eventually get here. And so
Yep.
the person is actually gold.
over on the right here. Yeah.
Over on the right, the very right, there's a gold person. And
Yeah.
that's actually connected to what's below, but
And what's this? This almost looks like a monkey face.
it's actually like an owl.
Right. Oh yeah, it is actually.
And it's an owl in a cave, which is quite interesting because so my key to my power
Yeah.
in the end is wisdom, and the owl
Right.
represents wisdom. And so this is my journey,
Yeah.
but the stages will be similar, but the parts will be different. And so this person here, who's gold over to the right, is connected
To the
the owl, and
as well
as the growth and the energy source up here.
Right.
Now this other person that's up above, like the rainbow here,
Up at the top. Here,
at
yeah.
the top, that person's actually gold and white.
Right.
So they've still got that duality thinking, but it's not black and white. And this is where a lot of people believe is where we need to get to.
Yeah.
But it's above everyday reality.
Yes.
So this is the person that sees themselves as quite superior,
Yes.
and that they might have and all of that, and they're connected to this.
This is almost like spiritual bypassing. This is.
Yeah, that sort of thing, and they look down at the world and come up with solutions that aren't based in reality. And this could be someone with extreme book learning, but no
Yes.
lived experience.
Yes.
So it's great in theory. It could be someone that's developed this, guru type life that doesn't actually apply to real life.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the spirit, so these are both sort of like the spiritual,
Yeah.
but we need the connection of the 2 sides. And so this is like a cat, but
Yes.
it's not really a cat. But it just signifies like a higher being.
With this
Yeah.
bit above it.
Yeah. And, you know, we have clouds, and in the actual painting it's a little bit more three-dimensional, and this part here is really rough. This, when you're going through here, you feel quite out of control in lots of ways. Nothing makes sense anymore.
Yes.
But we've got, I think, too many people making decisions based from here.
Yeah,
We
down
have-
here with black and white person.
Yeah, signifying simplistic thinking. And when I said earlier about the politician asking for one solution for suicide prevention, that's what they're saying.
Yes.
And a lot of our leaders are very one-dimensional.
Yep.
And they only see things from their own perspective of how they've grown up. Whereas here you're actually exploring a lot of different perspectives. So that's the everyday reality linear
It's on
of
your
journey from left to right
Right.
through life. And, you know, and so that's but this is because this is a linear life, but it's also putting in the time and space within here, and also the energy and Hawley within these bits.
Yes.
So, but it's a round one understanding. It's very linear. It's very stage orientated.
Yes. You get that as you
Yeah.
explained it.
Yeah, and you know, this is growing. This is changing. It's evolving. So that is a round one understanding, but combining
round one
all
is
everyday reality,
here
and now. But we're
Form
also
manifestation.
considering round 2 and round 3 within this painting.
Yep. Cool.
Right? And this is what I talk about, is that I would never have learnt that understanding of round 1 until I painted it. And this was actually the first painting I've ever done in my life.
Yeah.
And because...
Was this before the emotions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that was... Yeah, but that was a drawing. This is an actual painting.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating that when I paint, I always do it outside, and I always do it with my hands, never use a brush, which is so unbelievable to me because I hate anything on my hands. So I hate gardening because I hate the soil. I don't make pastry for the same reason.
You don't like getting dirty in the
and yet
texture.
this is always done. And while I'm doing it, there is no time and space. I'm just... So that's the round 1 understanding.
It's interesting, like having delved into the world of dreams previously with a previous guest, Debbie. I've really got the sense of just how intrinsically personal dreams and the messages of them are.
Yeah.
So then to actually, do a piece of art, then it helps you. Yeah. Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is realm 2 understanding.
Yeah.
And this little dot with the little dots around over on the right represents Earth.
Yes.
Right? These 3 levels here represent the 3 Hawleys.
The black, the
red and the yellow, mustard yellow.
Yeah.
They represent the 3 Hawleys below that I talked about in the other painting. But you'll see that the other dots are in it because nothing is ever 100% pure.
Yes.
So you have the other bits within that bit.
Nothing is isolated.
Yes, it's all connected. Now, this is actually the
top left.
The top left represents the source of energy.
Yep.
Right? And this line that curls all around across is like the life force.
Right.
That
So
is
this
these,
arc that goes-
so is the joining together of the energy and Hawley, which then,
So these are Hawley.
they're sort of,
black, red,
and then the one up in the top left-hand corner represents the energy, and it looks the same.
Yeah.
But
And
it's
got
actually-
the coloured dots.
But it's actually the pure source of energy above.
Right.
And they combine to give us our life force,
Which is the
the line that goes across.
Yeah.
And that life force is part of our energy pattern.
Right.
And so each one of us has a tiny, tiny little bit out of that
in
here, as does the Earth, as does the other planets.
And what's this little red thing down the bottom right?
That's my signature.
Right.
It's 3 fingerprints.
Right, okay.
So all my paintings have the 3 fingerprints, which represent, and each one has 3 colours, which is realm theory, the 3 by the 3 by the 3. So that's a realm 2 understanding.
Yeah.
And then the third painting we have here,
yes,
goes this way, is a realm 3 understanding.
yes.
And this is the patterns of time and energy, time and space.
Yeah.
And omniety. So the lines that go in one direction all represent lines of time. So there's multi levels of time and it continues on. The ones this way represent space.
So the one's coming down.
Well, it doesn't because it's relative. So
yeah. Okay. And
the brown dots at the cross points represent the here and now.
Right.
And in each of that is where the everyday reality is. Right? All these little dots that are all over it, well, I should say the background is actually the Hawley and how that sort of, because Hawley can't flow because it's substance without
energy,
without form. It just exists. So each one of the same colour exists everywhere and is connected, but not in the here and now.
So that's again.
Okay, so each one of the colours in the background represents a different substance of Hawley.
Right.
And everything that's the same colour is actually connected even if they're separated.
Yep.
All right? And so and the dots really represent the energy. These bits that are on top, I don't actually know.
Right.
What that is, but I know it's critically important. And so as I develop my own mind, I will understand this more.
What are these sort of orangey red cloudy?
Yeah, but they've all got 3 colours in, and it's a different paint altogether.
Right.
So these are an enamel paint. This was all an acrylic paint.
Right.
Which was, because this leads into the synchronicity of it all. So I'd been painting and my husband went to the shop and then he came back and he says, oh, you need these. And he gave me these 3 enamel paints. And I looked at him, I went, I don't need them. What the hell are you doing? And then all of a sudden, it was on here. And so often, and this is, earlier we talked about the know why.
Yes.
Sometimes we just don't know why. It just is. And that's what this is.
They just are.
Yeah, just are. And
do you have a sense that they'll reveal themselves or that they're there just to sit there?
I think they'll reveal themselves. You'll also notice that there's 3 different colours of energy. Dotted lines. And like this one has a source here, this one has a source here, and this one has a source down here.
Right.
And they all come from different places. And so our entire world, our entire universe is in one of these brown dots. And so that contains all of realm 1 and 2, is in there. And so this is much wider out.
Yeah, there are other dots.
Yeah. Which is a whole nother
topic of conversation. Yes,
very much so. And it just goes on and on, which is why it's painted right to the edge.
Yeah.
And it just keeps going in. And
it's
so this
like
is
small.
So these represent the time-space continuum.
Yep.
But they cross over and we exist in the here on one of them.
Right.
And you'll notice that if this is time, so this brown dot in the middle is the here in time, either side is the there.
Yes.
So this is past and present, past and future
Yep.
in round 1, but in round 2 it's expanding and contracting.
Yes.
So this side's expanding. That if this side expands, this side contracts.
Yes.
But then in round 3, the time is infinite. So it's all of it is existing simultaneously.
I'm sure many of the things that we hear about people playing with when we consider things like quantum mechanics, etc., etc.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Similarly with the line of space.
Yes.
So there you go. So that's the 3 levels of understanding.
Yeah.
But it's you can't really apply one without the other because they're all interrelated.
Yes.
So you can observe something from a round 3 perspective,
Yes.
but round 1 and 2 is in there.
Yes.
You can observe from a round 2 perspective, but round 1 and 3 is within there.
Which is one of the original principles you gave me at the start.
Yes. Yeah. The really interesting bit is that when you have round 1 and round 2 intersecting in the negative space is what creates round 3. So they actually recreate each other.
Right. Say that again.
Okay, so round 1, the interaction between round 1 and 2
Yes.
creates round 3. The
Tell
interaction.
me about the interaction again.
It's so if we use you as a thing,
Yeah.
as a thing.
As a thing, yeah.
Sorry.
go on.
So you as Bryn here,
Yeah.
this is your physical body. That's
Yes.
here and now.
Yes.
Within there is realm 2.
Yes.
Your body and realm 2 of the energy in Hawley create realm 3,
Which is?
time and space,
Yes. Right. I see.
right? Realm 1 and realm 3 together create the energy in Hawley
Yeah.
because the energy is in the negative space of time and the Hawley is in the negative space of space. It's so interconnected.
Yes.
But when you really understand, and then it's all how it all flows together and how there's a pattern that allows energy to flow exactly how it needs to, then everything's in harmony.
Last question before I ask you the last question. Because I finished the water. Sorry. How have you gone out and tested this? How have you gone out and almost verified it, tested it, if you know what I mean? Because it's one thing to say. It's one thing to say if you develop the mindset to understand it, then you know. But then.
Okay, so all my work has tested it.
Yes.
And so I use this in the treatment of mental health.
Right, yeah.
Right? And I use it in changing the structure and organisation of a company.
Right.
Right? Because once you understand the self-organisation and how everything goes together, you can create things to happen. I used it, so in a really previous job, I was a manager of a division of general practice, and one of the things was to get GPs to follow best practice in a whole range. The thing is, the doctors believe they're doing it.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So if you say, oh, we want you to do this, they go, we're already doing it. So nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
And so by using this, I worked out that, to change a system, you need 3, which is because of the 3 realms, you need 3 people to come on to change a system.
Yeah.
And so what I did I put out that we're going to get GPs to do an audit on one tiny aspect of one chronic condition.
Yeah.
Right? And we just randomly selected.
Yeah.
And we selected like 10 doctors out of the 120. And what we said is each year we're going to do 10 GPs. And this one GP rang me out. Bloody waste of time. What are you doing? You know I'm doing all this. And I said, all right, you do the audit, show me that you're doing it, and then we don't have to have any other discussion about it.
Yeah.
And so he went off and did it.
Yeah.
And what we were looking at was, just for context, was diabetes.
Yes.
Right? And the clinical guidelines say you need to test their blood pressure every 3 months. They need to have this particular test every 6 months and this one once a year. And so what the thing was, the next 5 patients you see with diabetes, you just do a quick audit, or you give it to your receptionist to do an audit.
Yeah.
And he found that on 3 out of the 5, he hadn't done a blood pressure for a year.
Yeah.
And he was absolutely shocked. So he actually wrote a newsletter article saying every GP should do it.
Yeah.
What happened? Every GP, not every, but
Most.
they started,
Yeah.
and it changed the culture,
Mm.
right? Which also changed the culture in, Roslyn has some ideas.
Yeah.
So then they started reaching out, do you know how to improve this? Right? Typically when we have a problem, we either hire more people or do something. But this teaches us to consider it in different ways.
Yeah.
And when you understand...
Rather than doubling down on the problem.
Yes.
And often our response to a problem
is...
or to work harder.
Yes.
Which then doubles the size of the problem
Yeah.
because you did the same.
And I knew all I needed was one GP to recognise, because it's human nature to believe that we're doing a good job.
Yeah.
And we're doing it most of the time, because what I wanted to implement was a computer system that would actually pop up and say, this person needs, so it would come up.
Yeah.
And this was way before most GPs had computers, so it was all...
Yeah.
But so there's so many things we can do, right? And so if you want to change the culture of an organisation, you use and we call it the power of 3. And we get either 3 groups or 3 whatever, from different parts of the corporation to actually go through and experience part of this.
Yeah.
And then the ripple effects go on to other people.
Yes.
Because the self-organisation of this person has changed. So then that impacts everyone else.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of work with generational trauma. So, and this was just last week, a woman rang me, an Aboriginal woman, who'd come to a training because her workplace said she had to, and she came to assess whether our training was suitable. And so while she was in the training, I really felt like she wasn't that involved or anything. She was questioning, and really didn't share hardly anything of her life. And this is 18 months later, she's rung me and she said, she actually wanted to, because she's got a new job now, she wanted some other information, but she said, I just want to tell you that what you taught me has changed everything in my life.
Yeah.
Because before I was so ashamed of what had happened to me that nobody knew, and I was just pushing it all down and all of that. And then you made me, through the process, realise that it wasn't my fault, it wasn't this. And so she said, well, then why am I carrying all this? So she was able, because we teach 3 steps for is to acknowledge it, express it, and then let it go.
Yeah.
She said, it was actually really easy to let it go because I had attached all this importance to it which didn't belong. But she said, but not only that, because I've done this, my kids are now
doing this,
and I haven't actually told them anything. And, you know, I have a brother that's lived with me for the last 15 years and he's chronically suicidal, and every day I'm worried about him. She said, I just started speaking about her experience. She says, and this week he's gone and left and got a job.
Oh.
Right? And she says, so the energy has changed in that family, which has then allowed him to change without even doing very much at all.
Yes. Yes.
So there's lots and lots of applications. And before I came here, I was talking to someone else and they were asking me a very similar question. And so I've used it for human type stuff, right? I talked a few years back to an exploratory geologist who was really interested in it. And he said he wants to do it so that he can see the patterns for oil exploration.
Right.
Which is totally not my area.
Yeah.
And then, so we have a program called Leaders Without Borders, which is, it goes over 3 years, 7 weeks. So it's 2 weeks in the first year, 3 in the second, 2 in the third, intensive weeks, to actually develop the mind to that level. And the people that were wanting to do it are financiers, because they want to see if they can use this for the money markets, right? Because everything follows this pattern. But I don't know that knowledge.
Yes.
I know the knowledge of what experiences people need to develop that.
Yes.
So that's what we give people, is the experience so they can
find it for themselves. And embed it for themselves. And then they can use all their substantive knowledge in their industry to align that industry with the natural laws of the universe. It's actually simple. It's very simple.
I know, like we've talked, you know, to actually develop your mind, you don't actually have to understand all of that.
Yeah. What do you have to do?
It's have this well, for me, because my core energy is about teaching, I teach experiences, and I have a structured step-by-step, stage-by-stage way. So the Aboriginal elders who also develop this do it in a much more non-linear, non-verbal way, and you watch them work and it's just like, oh. But our Western mind feels like it rejects that way.
Yes.
And so this is one way of doing it. It's not the only way.
Yeah.
And you'll know people that actually understand this intrinsically.
Yes. Yes.
And you'll see it in movies. You'll see it you'll feel it in songs. You'll feel like when it aligns with the natural laws, it resonates with us.
Yes.
And so that's, you know, it is about us finding that. So.
That is so cool. So the last question I ask all my guests is, it's pretty huge after that, is if I was to able to slow everyone down for 5 or 10 minutes, everyone, and you could just pop a question into the collective consciousness for all of us to consider individually, what would that be?
What popped straight into my head is, what are the secrets of the universe? And the second one was, what's the meaning of life?
Yeah. What are the
secrets of the universe?
Why do you think that popped up?
Because that plays on the inquisitiveness of people wanting to know this.
Yes. Yes. And consider life bigger. Consider something bigger than themselves.
Yeah, and consider that there are secrets of the universe.
It's been awesome talking to you today.
Well, it's been it's been really good, because as I said to you on the phone, I've developed this and I haven't really had the opportunity to sort of talk to a lot of people about it. Yeah, and I've talked to some people, but you often get people just like, this is too much.
Yeah.
So it was really good, and your questions were on the money. They were really good.
So if somebody wants to reach out and find you, how do they do that?
We have a website, wisdominyourlife.com.au.
There you go.
And we have a whole range of different programs, all using this, but in all different levels. So we have healing programs for those that have fragmented minds. We have unifying humanity for those that want to connect energetically with the rest of the humanity. And we have the Leaders Without Borders program, which actually teaches all of this and develop your mind to that. And we also have training for like mental health professionals who want to use this with their clients.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
That's all right.